Good evening and welcome to the slightly delayed meeting of the Crawley Borough Council's Cabinet of the 5th of February 2025. I am Councillor Michael Jones, Leader of the Council and Chair of the Cabinet. There are no scheduled fire drills tonight, so in the event of the fire alarm sounding, please leave the building via the main spiral staircase and through the main reception doors. Once outside, please turn left and make your way to the fire assembly point located beyond the multi-storey car park on Exchange Road. If you're unable to use the stairs, please wait in the council chamber and you'll be guided by members of staff to the evacuation lift. This meeting is being live streamed via the council's YouTube channel. Please note that there is a no comments function available as part of this webcasting. The council is a data controller and will retain the data collected during this webcast. This will be done so in accordance with the council's published data retention policy. Any members of the public seated in the public gallery should be aware that by entering the chamber they are consenting to their image being captured by the automated camera system. Recordings will be used for webcasting and or training purposes. Councillors are reminded to take note of what is displayed on the screens in the room, as this shows what is being recorded and webcast. Cameras are currently set to capture you in seated positions, so please remain seated when speaking. You can request to speak as usual in committees by raising your hand, to speak by pressing the button with the face on it, and the microphone will go green when you're live. We will now commence with apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Noyce and apologies for lateness from Councillor Sue Mullins and Councillor Chris Mullins.
Thank you. Disclosures of interest. Does any member have any disclosure of interests? No, I don't believe so. Minutes. Now we come to the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of January. Does the Cabinet agree that the minutes are an accurate record of this meeting? Agreed? Thank you. Public question time. We have 15 minutes for public question time. I'll invite each person in turn to the table at the front of the public seating area to ask their question, which must be a question, not a statement, and be related to the functions of the Cabinet. It must not relate to an individual case or duplicate, in essence, a question which has been put to the Cabinet in the past 6 months. Please state your name, which ward you live in, and then ask your question. I will then invite other councillors or myself or officers to respond. You may then ask one supplementary question which should relate to your original question or the response given to it. We will start by noting the submitted written public questions as detailed in the supplementary agenda from page 3, which includes the responses. Mr. Simons, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair, and all. My name's Richard Simons from the Ifield Society. Will this council declare an ecological emergency within the Ifield rural fringe as detailed in policy CL8 of its Crawley local plan, just as Bristol Council declared an ecological emergency in Brislington Meadows 5 years ago? I ask this question for two primary reasons. Number one, the staggering disregard by Horsham District Council for the ecological and environmental impact of its local plan on the west of Ifield rural fringe, which includes Ifield Brook Meadows. Number two, the recent deeply disturbing research that 78% of children suffer from eco-anxiety, which stands for ecological anxiety, and refers to the distress, worry and fear about ecological and environmental threats for the children. Perhaps this renewed call for an ecological emergency, but I understand you did declare a nature emergency in December. Maybe it's an opportunity for us to show our children that we do actually care about their future and their future environment, and that we are now prepared to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simons. I will be responding on this question in the absence of the Cabinet Member for the Environment, Sustainability and Climate Change, Councillor Noyce, who sent his apologies. It is difficult for me to comment on what Horsham District Council is doing, other than to say that the council continues to maintain its opposition to the West of Ifield proposals. Mr. Simons, you might already be aware, but the council has already declared a nature emergency, which applies to the whole of Crawley Borough, including the parts of the Ifield rural fringe which are located within our borough boundaries. The nature emergency declaration was agreed by full council in December, alongside our new climate emergency declaration. And furthermore, the council has had some survey work done to look at how biodiversity on the Ifield Brook Meadows site can be enhanced further in the future. And if you do ever have any points you want to, detailed points you want to raise in relation to that, you're very welcome. But in the future, you're very welcome to take that up with us offline. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's just that I must have missed the nature of the emergency in last December, which I'm a bit surprised about, because being sensitive to the issue. Obviously the publicity was for the housing emergency, which obviously is a kind of interrelated subject, but that, it seems, got the media coverage in terms of the housing emergency. The nature emergency was lost on me, I'm afraid. Sorry, Chair. Maybe it was the media problem.
No problem. Well, obviously we have a free and independent media, and they are welcome to report this. But I'm sure everyone will back me up in saying that was definitely agreed at just about a month and a half ago. Okay. Did you have a supplementary question, Mr. Simons? Nothing about a cycle path through. Oh, sorry. Okay, no. I beg your pardon. No, that's someone else. Okay. No.
Actually asked that question as a supplementary, and I apparently not able to ask that, as it were, on his behalf. So,
Okay.
I mean, I can ask that.
Well, it is on the record, Mr. Simons, and he will get the answer, and I'll ask Democratic Services to make sure that the resident gets a link to it. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming along and participating. Thank you. Further questions from the public. So I'll just do item 5, which is further notice of intention to conduct business in private and notifications of any representations. Please can I ask the monitoring officer to confirm if we have received any notifications?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Before I go to item 6, I will welcome councillors Chris and Sue Mullins to the meeting. Can I just check that you don't have any disclosures of interest, Councillors Mullins? Well, I'm sure you are, but none that would constitute. That's not a problem at all. But no interest to declare. Thank you very much. So we will now move on to the reports. And item 7, we will start by considering the housing compliance policies report. Councillor Irvine to present.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as you and Cabinet are well aware by now, we're going through the process of putting our housing policies to paper, because we've done it for several Cabinet meetings now. And the purpose of that is, first of all, to make sure that everything that we do is written down, because it's the right thing to do. Secondly, to get us ready for any future inspections by the housing regulator. And thirdly, just to invite any comments that that Cabinet might have about the policies themselves. They are quite detailed. They're longer than the usual ones. So I'm glad to say that we've got Amanda Kendall, the head of Crawley Homes, and Jeff Tarrant, Chief Surveyor, Compliance Surveyor, here to answer any technical questions that anyone might have. So that's it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Irvine. I'll open the debate for any Cabinet members who would like to say anything at this point. Councillor Nawaz.
Thank you. I'm just looking into this report, and it's very well put together, and I think that's quite important. We have a focus on safety side of things, where our tenants feel safe and reassured everything is under the legislation. One thing I was struggling to find, maybe in there, buried in there somewhere, the reporting of if there any incident. Is that data available to public as well, or some shape or form, or how people can find out about those kind of things?
It's a fantastic question, Councillor Nawaz. Thank you for asking it. In the higher risk policy, the higher risk buildings policy, which is those over 18 metres, it's called mandatory incident occurrence reporting. I'm pleased to report that we have no mandatory incidents to report as such, but you are absolutely correct, sir. That is a record for both buildings, which whether it is in the public domain is another question, but it is a record that is made available to the residents and the relevant persons within those buildings. That much is absolute under the Building Safety Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nawaz. Are there any other... Councillor Sue Mullins.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Just one little note. I noticed it says there's a need to drive up standards in the sector, and that's really interesting because these days we see an awful lot of reports on TV and in the news about the very poor standards that many people are living on, and therefore if we're setting a very high standard, a high bar, then I think that's a great thing for everybody else within the borough to aim at, and also gives us a standard for other people, other councils to look at, to see what we're doing here and how well we're doing it. And therefore I'm really glad that we update all of our policies really regularly, and therefore we make sure that we are offering the very best accommodation to our tenants that we possibly can. Thank you.
Councillor Chris Mullins.
Yeah. Mine's slightly diversive like it normally is, but
as long as it's on point, Councillor.
on the general issue of safety, I mean, it's important that we have a good safety policy and we keep it up to date, but we are dealing with an unsafe substance, i.e. gas or even hydrogen if it ever came along. Have we future plans for heat pumps, maybe for our newer houses, to sort of go forward into the future to move away from gas boilers, which I know the government wants us to do, and it's part of the zero policy. What's the future for our council stock and heating? Is there a different plan in line?
Thank you, Councillor Mullins. I can respond to the first point about are heat pumps included in the policy, which they absolutely are. So it's called the gas and heat in brackets policy, and that is for that very reason that as we diversify the power source that fuels our homes, that heats our properties, our homes, they'll be relevant to both. At the moment we have a handful, but as that diversifies, both fuels will be relevant to this policy. And then as we fully transition over in the fullness of time, the policy name can be changed when we have no gas boilers left. But it's absolutely something that we consider, take seriously, and have included within this policy.
Very good answer, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mullins. Any other points or questions, Cabinet? Not seeing anyone else. Did you want to come back on any of the points, Councillor Irvine?
No, I don't think so, Chair, except to say that obviously the policy required everyone connected with Crawley Homes, contractors, tenants, employees to work to make sure that these policies are implemented for the safety of everybody.
Thank you. So just to conclude, these are substantial reports, and councillor observers will have seen a raft of such policy papers coming through in recent meetings. I think this underlines this council's commitment to our tenants. We are also accountable to the regulator. We take safety very seriously, so everything we can do to avoid another Grenfell tragedy locally is something that I know that we're very serious about. And I also know that the Cabinet knows how much work that Crawley Homes have been doing very recently in all of this, and with work towards the housing regulator, and they have our heartfelt gratitude. We appreciate the situation and what they've done to ensure that this council continues to maintain the high standards that we're rightly proud of. So on that basis, I move that the Cabinet approves the recommendations as set out in 2.1 on page 11 of the agenda pack. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Irvine. Is that agreed? Thank you. We move on to consider the Housing Revenue Account Property Portfolio Rents 25-26 report. While the Council's rules allow for the Cabinet Member for Housing to make this decision alone, this year, to give him full credit, the Cabinet Member wanted this to be a subject that was open to more scrutiny and attention, and opened it out to a decision to be confirmed by the full Cabinet. This would also be consistent with feedback from the LGA that this would be good practice and in line with other local authorities. But at this point, I'm pleased to request Councillor Irvine introduces the report.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the credit. It's much appreciated. Yeah, I mean, in usual years, this would have been delegated to me, but because basically the rent increase itself is fairly straightforward because it's all based on a formula set by government. There are extra charges being brought in this year, and because they affect tenants across the town, I personally felt that it would be better if we had input from other councillors to make sure that they thought that what we were doing was the right thing to do. And what these modest increases will do is bring in some much needed extra income for the housing revenue account to ensure that our housing revenue account in future years is in a healthy state to do all the things that we want it to do. So with that, Chair, I'll leave it open for discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Irvine. Can I open the debate for other Cabinet members? Would anyone like to say anything at the moment? Councillor Sue Mullins.
Thank you. I mean, as councillors, none of us want to put up rents or rates or charges in any way at all, but we have to live in the modern real world and understand that if we want a healthy housing account and we want all our residents to benefit, then we have to increase in line with other councils and with government guidelines. So it is really important that we do that, but also that we explain very carefully to our residents what we're doing and why we're doing it, and which is why I'm so glad that we have a very clear policy of how we go about it and how we communicate to our residents the time scales and what's going to happen and when their rents will go up. So nothing comes as a nasty shock. So everything is well prepared in advance and people know what we're doing and why we're doing it. It's really important that we are clear as we possibly can be with all our residents, and therefore that all our residents benefit from that knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sue Mullins. Any other comments? Just to conclude from myself, the general thrust in the report is an increase in rents of inflation, CPI plus 1%, and this is certainly in line with increases recommended by the government over the last few years. and is almost certainly still lower than general increases experienced in the private rented sector. What this importantly allows us to do is build in resilience to the council's housing revenue account, ensuring that we continue to have sufficient funds to service our tenants to a satisfactory standard, and also that other things like repairs and other investment can be done for both the short and the long term. So I know the Cabinet as a whole has also had a chance to preview the proposed increase in fees and charges, and even with the rental increases as stated above, the surge in right to buy sales that we're currently experienced mean that our finance officers are projecting a reduction in rental income of approximately £864,000 annually. Now, this means to remain adequately funded, we need to attempt nearer to cost recovery on some of the services such as cleaning that residents receive, which are not covered by the rents. It is also arguably fairer in some respects, as otherwise we have a situation where some tenants are subsidising services for other tenants that they don't benefit from. Now, there's a balance to be struck there, but that's up to us to strike that balance. And one thing that the Cabinet has resisted, which will be seen in the recommendation, was in elderly residential sheltered accommodation, where we considered the rise in service charge to cost recovery levels would have been a bit too steep in 1 year. And the recommendation is to only charge a proportion of that, with a view to consulting those residents about arrangements going forward for next year. And I do personally think, on balance, that's the fairest and the right thing to do. Councillor Evan, would you like to come in?
I'd just like to say, Chair, that I agree with everything that everyone said, and I thank you all for your support. I think it was a useful thing to do to get the buy-in of other councillors on this. And as you say, well, as Councillor Mullins said, no one likes to see extra costs put on people, but sometimes you have to. It's necessary for the greater good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I move that the Cabinet approves the recommendations as set out in 2.1 on page 79 of the agenda pack. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Irvine. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you, Cabinet. We will now move on to consider the Budget Monitoring Quarter 3 report. I will introduce that. Councillor Ayling, you are here in your capacity as the Chairman of the Commission. Welcome to you. As is normal, I don't think I said it earlier on, so I'll say it now. As is normal, I will call you in for the items that the Commission has considered and call you in. But I'll just say a few words first by way of introduction. So the report sets out the projected financial outturn against the budget for 24-25, and the overall revenue position has not changed, Cabinet, substantially since Quarter 2, although there have inevitably been movements within the portfolios, and that's all in table 5.1 of the report. The outturn variance against budget is projected to be £412,000 more favourable than expected. And combined with £195,000 of earmarked reserves that are no longer required, this has resulted in a general fund balance forecast of £3.352 million. Now, this is a significant improvement against the budget, and members will be aware of the £3 million minimum recommended balance set by the Council. We continue to be above this level through hard work, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank our finance officers and the senior management team for their work in helping the Council reach this position. Given the pressures we've been facing, it is no mean achievement, I would say. As mentioned, there are inevitably changes which are detailed in the report. The main areas of improvement from Quarter 2 are in relation to the Crate building, where we're £225,000 better off. Waste and recycling income is better than we expected, 91,000, and we've had some success recoveries from ongoing benefits, which is approximately £103,000. The main adverse variation are development control fees, which are now £321,000 lower, and that's £115,000 worse than we thought in the last quarter. People might ask why that is, and overwhelmingly the reason is that because water neutrality continues to have an adverse effect on many parts of the council, and again this is something entirely out of our control, and the planning restrictions are ones that are imposed by Natural England, not this council. But what it does mean, Cabinet, is it means that people can't submit planning applications in the way they used to be able to, and it means we can't charge the relevant fees for it as a council. That creates significant financial strain for us. Now, finally, the net interest on investments forecast has been reduced due to a revised cash flow forecast and higher balances that should have gone to the HRA, or should have been attributed. So speaking of the HRA, the financial forecast for the housing revenue account has improved by 165,000. There is no change on the forecast for expenditure on reactive repairs. There is a change, being £800,000 higher than the budget, but gas boiler repairs are lower than expected by 108,000. That is, as was said earlier on, mitigated by the better net interest, which will make the housing revenue account £83,000 better off. The capital budget's been updated for the £2 million improvements to K2, as mentioned, there's the right to buy receipts and the current volatility around that. So the reduction in discounts has been discussed previously, but it has created a surge in applications, which is working its way through the system. And although that will have some capital benefits, it will have some revenue disbenefits as well. The reserves, the report includes a table of reserves at Appendix X, which are considered adequate. So having introduced it, I'll open the debate for other Cabinet members. Oh, sorry, no, I won't do that first. I will ask Councillor Ayling to share what was said at the Commission.
Thank you. The Commission considered report FIN 682 of the Head of Corporate Finance. I'm not going to read out all the comments as they have been published in the Cabinet supplementary agenda, but I intend to focus on the key points. Confirmation was provided on the impact due to recent changes in right-to-buy discounts, which had resulted in an increase in the number of applications from tenants. Further resources would be sought to assist with the application process. Recognition that the devolution and local government reorganisation would impact the authority's resources. It was highlighted that future years' financial projections may not exist beyond 2027 and 2028. It would be beneficial to be aware of future savings that could be put towards any reorganisation works required. It was further proposed that the devolution and the LGR should be included on a strategic risk register in the future. Clarification was sought as to the outturn figures for Tilgate Park and the Nature Centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ayling. Just on that point, I mean, absolutely, devolution and local government reorganisation will certainly have revenue implications. Let's hope with the most recent announcements today from the government that some of these details become clearer sooner rather than later in terms of what support we might get. I'll open the debate now for other Cabinet members, if anyone would like to. Councillor Sue Mullins?
Thank you. When we look at the outturn figures and that, we go through an awful lot of papers before we get to this point, and obviously the figures change and change all the time before we actually get to the final figures. And I know that means that I think budget monitoring staff go right to the wire to get us the most favourable outcome that they can. And when you read through the papers, it can get very complicated and can get quite baffling. You can look at figures on this page and look at figures on that page, and they can get quite confusing. But sometimes little bits jump out at you, and the bit that's jumped out at me today is what we spend on our temporary accommodation. Now, strategically, we give temporary accommodation to anybody who turns up on the doorstep, who fits the criteria, and therefore we have a statutory duty to find accommodation for them. And we've had more and more people obviously turning up on our doorstep for a myriad of different reasons. But when you just look at the figures, when you look at the figures for 2018-19, our temporary accommodation spend was £456,000. Now, we recovered some of that from the government, £194,000, but that left us out of pocket by £262,000. That's over £250,000, which sounds like a huge amount of money. Until you jump forward to 24-25 and look at our projected figures, the temporary accommodation spend is projected to be, for the end of next year, £8,400,000. We might get back from the government in recovery just pushing £3 million, which leaves us £5.5 million out of pocket. Now, that's an incredible pressure. When we start talking about pressures on our budgets, that's one pressure that is really not sustainable, as those figures have gone up from £250,000 to £6 million in how short a time? 6 years. That's a scary amount of figures, and what we're predicting for the future years, I don't know. So something has to happen, something has to give, because I don't think any council can sustain that sort of pressure on its budget forever. So it's just one of the little thing, very large thing, that hops up out of the figures when you're looking at the columns and columns of figures. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sue Mullins. Any Councillor Chris Mullins?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about. I wanted to make a comment about the K2 developments, because I think it's very important for a building that we've had for 20 odd years now, and historically that might not be too long, but in terms of technology and development, it is quite long, and we're looking to bring that building up to modern standards and to suit the needs of our customers to a large extent, and to improve their circumstances. So I'm pleased to see this part of the report going through, where the finances will be available to do that in a comprehensive deal with the K2 management under contract. So thank you, Leader, for your support in all of this. It's very important for the future of K2 that we remain to be the most successful and most important regional sports centre with our 50-metre pool. It really is an outstanding place, and it gives us an opportunity to take us forward into the future.
Thank you, Councillor Mullins. Any other members of the Cabinet? Councillor Irvine.
Excuse me. Excuse me. I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that one of my big concerns over the last few months has been the I don't know if you call it overspend, but the amount spent over and above our budget for repairs, which was I think in excess of £900,000, but that has dropped down now to just over £800,000. So it's definitely going in the right direction, and I hope that very soon we will be bringing forward some new proposals to try and reduce that overspending even more. So that at least is something to be reasonably cheerful about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Irvine. I don't see any other Cabinet members wishing to speak, so just to respond on a few of those items. I mean, Absolutely agree with Councillor Sue Mullins about temporary accommodation. When we talk in the forthcoming item about next year's budget, temporary accommodation will be a constant theme. But yes, I mean, the £8.4 million on temporary accommodation doesn't include the 2 million on Chagosians that the Home Office promise we will receive, and we look forward to that. But it does actually mean that we are spending as an authority £10 million every year, which is a very significant part of our budget. I believe it's over a third, or certainly around a third at least. I actually think that, given that emphasises the achievement we've made in actually receiving or being in the financial position we actually are at the moment. It's still not ideal, but given what we're facing, I repeat that I think that it is no mean achievement. Totally agree with Councillor Chris Mullins about K2. We do need to invest to keep our facilities at the highest standards, and K2 is no exception. We will continue to be proud and to protect the fantastic facilities we provide. Indeed, I also agree with Councillor Irvine about the about repairs. I mean, to a certain extent, a lot of that has largely been just the sheer inflationary pressures, which have been well above average. But he's also absolutely right that if we can get our scheduled maintenance programme into the right state, and we will do that with the 30-year plan, I understand, then we will then that will also hopefully unlock efficiencies and savings, which will be beneficial for the future. So on that basis, I will move that the Cabinet approves the recommendations as set out in paragraph 2.2 on page 85 of the agenda pack. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Nawaz, thank you. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you, Cabinet. We'll now move on to consider the 25-26 budget and council tax reports. You will note that there is a replacement Appendix C contained within the supplementary agenda for this report, and I'll move this as part of the main report. I think I'm correct in stating that just clarifies the process for the increase in taxi licence fees, which it does as it's stated in the supplementary paper. So. Item 10, I present the budget proposals to the Cabinet to recommend to the next full Council meeting for approval. Cabinet members will see that the Council will raise its share of council tax by 2.99%, meaning that for a Band D property, its annual council tax will rise by £6.94 from £232.10 to £239.04. That's an increase of just 13 pence per week, which represents exceptional value to businesses and the public for the large number of quality services that are provided by Crawley Borough Council. Now, given that we've seen in the news that in quite a number of other places, local councillors have been applying to the government to apply significantly higher council tax increases than ours, or even asking permission to sell off assets to go towards paying for revenue shortfalls, I believe that the Cabinet and our officers have helped us put forward a very solid budget indeed, given everything. And this is despite the challenging circumstances that the council has faced, which have been referred to earlier, with soaring costs for temporary accommodation. We now spend, let's be clear, we now spend £2 out of every £3 we collect in council tax providing accommodation, temporary accommodation to support Crawley residents. Now, over many years, Crawley has been disproportionately affected by reductions in government funding for local authorities. And that, combined with the vast increase in costs for temporary accommodation, has meant that the councils had to find savings of approximately £2 million in this year's budget. It's vast for our overall revenue. That's a vast sum. Now, a public consultation was held over a 4-week period for our residents to share their views with the council on their priorities for the year ahead. We've had to make some very difficult decisions in order to set a balanced budget this year, and we know that some of them will have an impact on the services that we offer. We have prioritised ways to generate income through our commercial buildings and assets and increase the deterrent for those who choose to litter or fly tip. Wherever possible, we have protected services for vulnerable people and delivered what we have heard in the consultation. We have protected the services that our residents valued, such as public protection and keeping Crawley looking the way we expect. We will continue to lobby the government to get what we consider as a fair deal for Crawley. The papers show that the council has managed to deliver a balanced budget for 25-26 with a welcome, albeit modest, contribution of £140,000 to the general fund. This forecasts that the general fund will to be at around 3.5 million at the end of the 25-26 financial year. While there are always uncertainties about increasing costs and events creating unforeseen expenditure, to be able to say we are in this position should give our residents confidence that matters are being run prudently and responsibly at this council, and we continue to protect their interests and their local public services provided by this council as best as is possible. The draft budget meets the council savings target for 25-26, identified in the budget strategy in November, with full year reductions totalling £2.134 million, comprised of £1.784 million of savings, including additional income, and the removal of £350,000 to the renewals fund's contributions. The council has a comprehensive capital programme of £82 million for 2025-26, comprised of £36 million of the general fund and £46 million from the HRA. The details contained in Appendix D of the report. This includes the £2 million health and fitness improvements at K2 announced in December 2024. So to conclude, we've had to make savings in this budget. This is not something that we want to do. And in making the savings, we are having to cut some services which are well run and which provide real value to the town's residents and businesses. No one is trying to pretend otherwise. But we have shielded these services for as long as possible. The temporary accommodation pressures mean that that is no longer entirely achievable, although we've done what we can. We really have. We've been through a process which has enabled us to look at every part of the budget. We've identified statutory and discretionary spend, as well as some of those non-statutory, but still essential services which, if were to be cut, would still need to buy in order to operate as an organisation. Through this process, we prioritised areas of discretionary spending for officers to look at, to develop proposals and identify what savings could be made. In addition, we have also looked at statutory areas and whether we can deliver differently to be more efficient and save money. We also aim to use our car parks better and increase income through paid-for parking. Our other proposals are set out in the report. We have been consistent with using what the public have told us in the consultation are their priorities. Now, sometimes I suspect more cynical observers wouldn't believe us when we say that, but I can absolutely say that when the findings from the surveys were coming through, that we responded to that. And the public told us that they want public protection and safety prioritised, and for the appearance of the town and the upkeep of our street scene and our neighbourhood services to be maintained. We could have gone further in making savings in these areas, but we did not do so to better reflect the views expressed. So I would say in future years, if residents don't believe that they'll be listened to, they should, because there have been things that have been changed as a result of this consultation. The public also told us fairly decisively, or very decisively, that they also believe that people should be paying nearer what the services cost to be provided, which we have also reflected in how we've approached this budget exercise. We've also looked at who should pay, and in services which are not universal have chosen to pass on more of the cost to the person using the service rather than spreading the cost across all residents through council tax. I'll finish there. And I'll bring in Councillor Ayling to present the Commission's comments, where we had an interesting discussion on Monday. Thank you, Councillor Ayling.
Thank you. The Commission considered report FIN 683 of the Head of Corporate Finance. Again, I will focus on the key points. Clarity sought and obtained on the savings and income creating activities proposals. Concerns raised regarding phases of the budget and the mix of service reductions. It was thought it would have been beneficial to list all the service areas, including those which had been potentially considered as savings but discounted to ensure further detailed scrutiny. The savings highlighted involved cutting services which were well run and provided value. But given the scale of the budget gap, savings had to be made. It was confirmed that the proposals had been developed following the finance seminars, and it was acknowledged that in some areas this would result in a reduction or changes in delivery, whilst being able to maintain standards. Clarity was sought on the overall government funding received, especially in relation to national insurance costs, as well as business rates calculation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ayling. It was a good discussion. Oh, was it not? Oh, it was. I think just Democratic Services have just switched it off for you, so that's yeah. But it was on while you were speaking. I can assure you, right? No worries, no worries. All taken care of. Councillor Crowe.
Yes. Good evening, Leader and Cabinet members. I'll start off by actually expressing a little bit of sympathy. I know only too well what it's like at both upper tier and lower tier local authorities this year in particular. I haven't seen a local authority anywhere, there might be one, but I haven't noticed one that isn't recommended to put up their council tax by the maximum amount they are allowed to without having to set a referendum. And of course that is lower for district and borough councils at 2.99%. And as the leader mentioned, there are quite a few who've applied for more than the 5% limit. Though I do think they tend to be the upper tier local authorities who've been they've been struggling for many years with adult social care in particular. We all know the demographics are not favourable in terms of the amount of demand for adult social care. But we've seen our own pressures as well here at Crawley Borough Council in particular with temporary accommodation costs, and that is definitely having an impact. So I have sympathy, although I don't think that sympathy has been reciprocated when I was deputy leader of this council, or indeed when the county council has had to make difficult decisions in previous years. But hey ho. Anyway, I was one of the 18 members of the public who watched the OSC meeting on Monday evening on YouTube. Although unfortunately, you've just been talking about microphones. I often couldn't hear the end of the meetings. I think it might have been because the chair didn't have a microphone on. I don't know, but it did make for quite a disjointed meeting to view on YouTube. And there were quite some members, certainly some Labour members, didn't contribute at all to that meeting. Now, Councillor Lanza asked some good questions, but I didn't feel that his questions were particularly well answered. Indeed, I recall a couple of things that the leader said. One of those was how, well, first of all, the national insurance, it says in the report that the cost to the council is 522,000, or the leader said it was less than $500,000. So I certainly welcome a bit of clarity on that. That's the impact of the government's rise on employers' national insurance contributions, for which, of course, we have had some compensation. It's only about a couple of $100,000, but the cost is $700,000, so the net cost is £522,000 to this council. And the leader said that, well, it's money going to the public sector, and he defended that. But really, I thought he was supposed to champion Crawley. And we obviously would like to see as much money as we can for Crawley Borough Council to avoid making some of the quite drastic cuts to services that are being proposed this year. The government seems to have several billion. The leader mentioned Togossian people, but they seem to have several billion to try and bribe Mauritius with to hand over islands that we already own. But hey ho again. The seminars were mentioned. I think the chair of OSC mentioned them, and yes, I attended. I think both of those seminars. I'm thankful we do have another one on the 13th of next week, on the 13th of February. But at no time at any of those seminars, unlike what's happened at the County Council, have any members actually seen any of the draft proposals, any of the draft service cuts. Now, the leader just said that some things changed as a result of the public consultation. Well, what's changed? You know, I don't know. The Cabinet may well know, but I don't know. Members don't know. Members of the public don't know. And indeed, Councillor Lanza made a very similar point at the OSC on Monday evening, how in previous years we have had member working groups, the Service Priority Working Group, I think that was one iteration of it, or the Budget Prior Working Group, that has gone through proposals. Because what we don't know is, when we look at this list of proposals for savings, is, well, what are they set against? What other proposals were ruled out? We don't know. So, hopefully we might hear a little bit more next week. And indeed, we've heard very little about what some of the income generation schemes. Now, Councillor Jones mentioned parking, and there's a figure here of £388,000 that the council hopes to increase its income through from parking charges. That's over £1,000 a day, every day of the year. I'd be fascinated to see how that's going to be generated for this council. And also litter enforcement, £170,000 a year. I'm all for cracking down on litter. Indeed, it was the Conservative opposition that actually forced this administration to start reintroducing littering fines when they had stopped issuing them just a few years ago. I will stop fairly soon, but I also heard from Councillor Irvine on an earlier agenda item, that we don't like putting up fees and charges, and I agree with that, but he said it was for the greater good. And well, I've never heard that mentioned in previous years when it's been a Conservative administration having to raise charges. And some of these savings that are proposed, like what does it mean, the bowling and croquet maintenance? What does that mean? Does it mean there's going to be no maintenance or no specialist? What exactly does it mean? Does it mean no one's going to maintain those lawns at all? Is the government not picking on older people enough with the Winterfield Arts? Do we really have to start picking on older people who tend to be the bowls players right now? For the sake of what that saving is, I really think that one in particular should be reconsidered. There's also in the fees and charges pest control going up by 10%. Now, if that was a Conservative administration, I know full well what the leader, Councillor Jones, would be saying now. He would be going on about more rats and more wasps and what have you. But hey-ho, when the boot's on the other foot, suddenly it's okay to put up pest control by 10%. Now, I don't dispute this is a difficult budget to set, and me and my group, we will look at this very carefully and see what alternatives there are. And clearly some cuts and some savings and some income generation is going to happen. There is no two ways about that. But I'm not particularly happy with the way that the wider membership has not had an opportunity to contribute towards this, and that we've only literally seen proposed savings at the time when the papers were published, unlike what's happened at the County Council, where they were shown, or at least some of them were shown, at earlier member seminars. I'll leave it there, Leader, and I'm sure you'll be looking forward to hear more from me at full council when we next come to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crowe. I'll come back towards the end, but what I'll do now is I'll open the debate for other Cabinet members. Councillor Chris Mullins.
Yes, thank you, Leader. First of all, I want to say I've been involved in budgets in this council going back to 1983, and this year was the toughest series of meetings on budgets that I think I've ever experienced. I've never known a situation that we're in now. In the past, we were actually quite a wealthy council, with very large reserves, and we could afford to do a lot of things. We never really talked about cutting things or increasing charges to any great extent, and a lot healthier. But in the 14 years of Tory rule, I mean, local government finance has been absolutely decimated, including losing the rate support grants and things like that. I mean, we have gone through a situation where we're looking at how we can scrape together and still keep our services, scrape together as much money from whatever resources we can. And it's particularly in my portfolio, I've been asked to look at increase in various areas, charges and car parks in my area as well, to put prices up and maybe to introduce charges. It's not been an easy time. It's been a very difficult time. And I remember the chief executive saying at one stage, we're in such a tough situation now that some of you might feel that it's bad enough that you don't really want to do this job anymore. You know, that it's getting to that stage. And, you know, and I think that we are really struggling to make ends meet. And I think what we've achieved this year in the circumstances that we've had to live with is amazing. We've actually kept our increases to the minimum and tried to alleviate the effect on ordinary people as much as possible, but still to make a balanced budget, you know, which is quite amazing. I don't know what we're going to do next year, and next year is a real worry. But this year, we've pulled through, and I think a lot of congratulations to our accounts people, Caroline and company, and to our chief executive, who's given us good guidance during these very difficult times to achieve this. None of us want to see some of the things that we're needing to look at happen. You mentioned the bowling. I'm telling you now that we're working with the bowlers, and I've been in touch with the bowlers because it's in my portfolio, and we're going to do what we can for the bowlers. We're not trying to close their bowling services down at all, but to maintain bowling greens to the very high standard that you have to is actually very expensive, and it's very difficult for us to make ends meet and still to do that. So we're talking to them and we're working with them, and we want to find solutions to the situation that they and actually us are facing as far as that's concerned. But I was dreaming for a long, long time about an incoming Labour government, but it's only been in about 6 months, and it's never going to be able to repair in 6 months a 22 billion black hole, which was left by the Tory administration. And that's the reality of the situation. And it's going to take a good number of years for us to repair the economic damage done by Liz Truss and company, which we have to get over. And we have to get over it for the sake of our people, for the sake of our society. None of us wants to charge residents more than we need to. And we know that residents in their wages and their general costs, food or renting or mortgage costs, are going through the sky. And none of us want to consciously make life difficult for our residents. We want people to have a good, comfortable existence. And that's what we've always been about, and that's still what we're about. So please take on board, Duncan, when you come to make your publicity campaign at the next full council, which I'm sure you'll do, where eventually you'll probably vote for this budget, which you normally do. But you'll make your points in the meantime. Please take on board the difficult circumstances that we are going through. And I think that the team here at Crawley Borough Council has done an excellent job and deserves congratulations for getting us to the situation we're in now, where we can go through with a working budget, and what we have to do now is to start worrying about how we're going to deal with next year. But this year we're okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Mullins. Councillor Sue Mullins.
No, follow that. Thank you very much. All through the agenda items that we've been through, we've talked about the high standard we set for Crawley homes, the high standard our customers, if that's what we call them these days, our residents expect from this council and have always enjoyed. Councillor Crowe talks about previous years and when they were in power for the short time that they were, and how they never had to, there were so many different things they did. But they didn't have the challenging times, as we've just been mentioned, the challenging times that we are going through at the moment, incredibly challenging times that this council's never had to face before. There's so many different things have led us into that. You know, we could go through a whole list, which I don't need to, but I'm quite sure Councillor Crowe knows exactly what we're talking about, so we don't need to do that. But our residents are expecting a high standard, and I think throughout this process, we've merely made sure that that is still going to happen. We've protected places like keeping Crawley tidy, keeping places Crawley looking green and tidy and smart and well looked after and well cared for. And that is really important to our residents. So trying to find ways round where we can save money has not been an easy thing to do. And I can assure you it's gone through, I don't know how many meetings and how many conversations. And it's easy to sit there and say, well, you haven't shared all this with everybody. You cannot share absolutely every word. And you just said yourself at the County Council, you've only shared some of the issues. You certainly haven't shared all of them. And I'm quite sure you've had lots of very difficult decisions to make there too. We talked about some of the awful lot of the pressures that we've had on us this year, but we've still managed to get to a balanced budget without being too painful for our residents. Yes, there are things we've had to look at, like the bowling greens, like the croquet lawns, like some of the stuff that really costs an awful lot of money and not so many residents benefit from. Yes, they're important residents. All our residents are important, of whatever age they are or whatever activity they like to do. So we don't take any of these decisions lightly. They are taken very, very carefully, and we are making sure that what we do is none of our customers, our residents, our people that live here notice too much of a difference, even though we've had to take some quite difficult decisions. Everything is covered. We've managed to stick within our budget. We are only rising our council tax in exactly the same proportion as the vast majority of other councils are doing, 13p a week. People need to look at how the balance of our council tax is. Look at that little wheel. See where the vast majority of the money goes. That goes to West Sussex. The next biggest chunk goes to the police commissioner. What's left is for Crawley. And by goodness, do we provide some services for that very small amount of money. And they still are of a very high calibre and a very high standard. And I hope that in future years, whatever happens to councils, we'll be able to continue to offer that service.
Thank you, Councillor Sue Mullins. Can I call in Councillor Ian Irvine now? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't really know how to follow the last two contributions, but I shall do my best. And also, I really, in a way, I thank Councillor Crowe for extending his sympathy for what we've had to do this year. And I first got elected to Crawley Council in 1986, and I came off the council in 1994. And I got re-elected in 2004. And I remember when I got re-elected, what struck me was that we used to, as Councillor Crowe referred to, we used to have a committee called the Services Priority Working Group, which didn't meet in public, but we met and we had to decide on our spending priorities. And those meetings got quite heated, because in those days there was money to spend. And to be honest with you, Chair, since those days, since 2010 up to now, I've never known anything like it, for having to look at cutting things back and raising charges and generally go through the fine detail of budgets to see where we can save money. And I'll be honest with you, it's not what I saved. I intended to be elected for as a councillor. I wanted to get elected to see things grow across the town, and at one time that is what we were able to do. But we're in a different situation now. And as far as I can see it, we've done our best to build a town that's got good facilities, and we're doing our best to defend those facilities for future generations. And that does mean that we will have to do some things which people are uncomfortable with. Let's just hope that in future years the situation's a bit better, and we can actually look forward to spending money instead of just cutting things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Irvine. I've got Councillor Yasmin Khan next.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say to Councillor Crowe and to everybody that's listening that these decisions were not made any easily. We sat there for days and we've had debates. We got upset. None of us, we don't really want to make these cuts, but we had no choice. And I promise you that we had looked at everything and where we could save and where we could cut. So we tried our best. We've had debates with the officers, with our chief executive. So we didn't just sit there and say, oh, do you know what, I don't fancy that and I don't fancy that, let me just cut that. No, we sat there and we had debates and we took our time, and we're not happy. I tell you that on some of these things, we're not happy at all, but we had no choice. So hopefully the future will be better and there won't be any cuts and we will have loads of money, but you know what the situation and what we're going through. So we didn't take it any lightly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. I'll let you come back, Councillor Sue Mullins, if there isn't any other Cabinet member who'd like to speak first who hasn't spoken. No, okay, in that case, so, yeah.
Just a really quick thing that I forgot to mention. Through this whole process, this hasn't just been a conversation in committee rooms between council members about cabinet and between cabinet members at all, because one of the things we've all made sure, and every one of us has made sure that we're doing, is that we're talking to those services, the people in those services, the people who run those services, about what the effects are, what we can do to ameliorate them. For instance, we've had to make some changes in how we fund the museum. In fact, the museum has done rather well out of it this year, a lot better than they were expecting. They were very happy about that. But that wasn't done without any consultation at all. I myself spent 8 hours in an away day with the people who run the museum, those people who are really committed to getting that museum up and running and going forward in a business-like way. I spent 8 hours at their away day supporting them in the decisions they were making to make sure that they would be successful in the future. Councillor Chris Mullins has just mentioned talking to the bowling people. Let's find a way forward. Yes, we've got this problem. We need to save some money somewhere. How can we help you to make sure that you are successful in the future? So these decisions are not made in little darkened rooms without us talking to anybody else. These decisions are made with the people who are affected and with our support to help them find a way forward to make sure that nobody loses out through this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mullins. I think I don't see any other people asking to speak, so I'll respond to the points that have been made. Councillor Chris Mullins, you're right. This is one of the most difficult budgets I've ever known, and you've been around a lot longer to observe the council to know to give the scale. And Councillor Irvine, you're absolutely right. We are doing our absolute best to defend our facilities. I'll address some of the comments from Councillor Crowe, which I didn't think were entirely fair. He compares us to some unitaries. Now, in terms of council tax increases, one of my comments would be that very few unitaries have our level of temporary accommodation pressures as a proportion of their overall revenue budgets. And indeed, he refers to previous behaviour from me at perhaps other councils. Well, I have to say to Councillor Crowe, I always made sure we had detailed budget amendments when I was at West Sussex County Council, and they went through the finance officers and they would have worked if they'd been chosen. Your side never chose to use them, but they would have worked. In terms of a debate about which government gave more, which is what it felt like when we started getting to national insurance. So as I told Councillor Lanza at the Commission on Monday, if you count pound for pound, we are better off than what we received under the last government last year. as long as you count everything and not just the revenue support grant. Now, I'm happy to admit that the local government settlement published on the 18th of December was not as favourable as we might have hoped. We got £300,000 less grant funding in cash terms because the funding floor, or whatever they've renamed the minimum guarantee, was changed. And I can clarify that the new burdens funding for the increase in employers' national insurance contributions does only partially fund the costs of the council, but the reason it's below £500,000 of continuing direct cost pressure is because in the final settlement, which we received only very recently, it was confirmed that we were getting £45,000 more from the government than in the provisional one, which is what's brought the figure down. But the point to be recognised is that the government has given us overall more through other sources, such as the recovery grant for less wealthy councils, a £1.426 million grant from DEFRA for the extended producer responsibility for packaging scheme, and we got additional grant funding for homelessness, undeniably more than we got last year. Now, it's not riches beyond the dreams of Croesus, but it has helped in its own modest way in helping the council stabilise its finances. So I think that's an important point to make there. Councillor Crowe asked about car parking. The process is ongoing and a report will be coming forward in due course and at pace. However, we have an estimate for the budget papers, and that's what this exercise is. It's not to give you the details to the nth degree, but it is to provide what our officers consider to be a true and accurate projection. And the officers have told us that what they believe will be coming forward is that is the realistic value for that. He mentions the decommissioning of the specialist bowls provision. And again, this isn't something that we've wanted to bring forward. Councillor Mullins is investigating alternatives. I think that's the most accurate way to describe it. But when money is tight, I think the public expect us to look quite clear-eyed at what's being spent. And for the services that the council currently cater for, I'm sorry to say it, but there are barely 50 users if you combine the clubs that are using it, and it needs to be paid for. Now, there are other facilities available elsewhere in the borough, and I think most fair-minded people would suggest that if this is an issue that they consider using those. That doesn't mean that we want to take this out on the existing bowls clubs. And if the existing bowls clubs were to come to this council and say we've come to an arrangement where we can cover the costs of the maintenance of our clubs greens ourselves, I don't think there's anyone at this council saying that we wouldn't be happy for such an arrangement. But I'm very happy for the cabinet member to have conversations, constructive conversations, like Councillor Sue Mullins had with the museum when money was an issue, and see what we can do. But there are no guarantees, and clearly, it's, as has been said with all of this, we're in this petition not through our own choice, but through necessity. So there is a fundamental challenge here, though. Which is all of our council officers are here for every member of the council. You've got the papers. All the information is there at your disposal, Councillor Crowe, and indeed your colleagues in the opposition. You can tell us what you would do instead. You know the service areas. You've not just arrived at this council. You can go through, if you want to do so, line by line. I was a little surprised to hear the reference to BAG, the Budget Advisory Group. That hasn't met since 2018, I believe. It's strange to start complaining about it now. We've done our best. We've been through the budget thoroughly. We don't believe that there are there potentially are alternatives that you can put forward, but we're not convinced at this point that they'd be particularly acceptable either to ourselves or the public. But again, as I said, there's a chance for the Conservative group to offer budget amendments at the full council if you think there is an alternative, and we will consider them, particularly if you give us advance sight of them. And that's as fair as I can say it. So on that basis, I'm going to bring the debate to a conclusion. Thank you to everyone who's contributed. And I therefore move that the Cabinet approves the recommendations as set out in paragraphs 2.2 on pages 113 and 114 of the agenda pack, including the updated Appendix C, very important, as detailed on page 9 of the supplementary agenda. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Noas. Is that agreed? Thank you. We will now consider the capital strategy report. This could be quite brief. It is a statutory requirement for local authorities to prepare a capital strategy and have it approved alongside the budget at council. It gives a high-level overview of how capital expenditure, capital financing and treasury management activity will be undertaken, thereby putting a regulatory framework around capital decisions, setting out how the council will determine capital spend and use capital resources to achieve the corporate objectives and support service delivery. It broadly follows the current approved strategy. However, the asset disposal section has been strengthened to put greater governance around disposal decisions should the council pursue any disposals, which it may well do. It is a strategy document that is part of good governance supporting ongoing financial resilience. I've been advised by our chief accountant that in the past it might have been tucked a little bit away in sort of the budget papers. So for full transparency, we are giving it its own report this year. So I will bring in Councillor Ayling to present the Commission's comments, which I don't remember very many of, but let's hand it over to you, Marion.
Thank you. The Commission considered report FIN 685 of the Head of Corporate Finance. The key points for the Commission were as follows. It was noted that the local authorities must produce an annual capital strategy. It followed best practice to have longer-term strategic planning and investment to ensure that the Council's long-term priorities can be delivered. It was noted that the asset disposal and exit strategy had been further developed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ayling. I'll now open the debate for other Cabinet members. I don't see any indication which I would say to the finance officer you must conclude is because they are delighted with it. So yes. So okay. So in that case, I just had one last look round. No, in that case, I'll move to the recommendation, which is I move that the Cabinet approves the recommendations as set out in 2.2 on page 159 of the agenda pack. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Khan, thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. We will now consider the Treasury Management Strategy report. Again, the Council is required to have a Treasury Management Strategy approved for the year ahead. It broadly follows that approved last year, the current strategy, which I think is absolutely right because it has demonstrated real success in my view. It also sets the limits of cash investments, who we can invest with and up to what level to keep our cash safe. We prioritise security over liquidity and yield and take a fairly lower risk approach to managing our cash whilst trying to achieve high returns. We have assumed a drop in interest rates, which together with capital plans will make it very challenging to generate the returns we've seen this year, even though we have a number of longer term deals locked in. One change to report is regarding the approved counterparties. We've reduced the time limit for money invested out down to 3 years on the advice of Arlene Close, the Council's Treasury advisors. This is just to be prudent, as we'd have been unlikely to go beyond that anyway. So on that basis, I'll bring in Councillor Ayling to present the Commission's comments.
Thank you. The Commission considered report FIN 686 of the Head of Corporate Finance. The key items from the Commission discussed were: it was confirmed that any capital expenditure which had not been paid for through either the revenue or capital resource would now increase the Council's capital financing requirement. Clarification was sought and obtained on the ethical investment policy, which stated that the Council would not undertake direct investment or borrowing activities with organisations. Those core activities include weapons systems. It was queried whether this was now inconsistent with the introduction of the Finance Industrial Strategy Policy Paper. In response, it was noted that the policy paper was recently launched and being developed. The Council would currently continue to prioritise security, liquidity, yield in that order. The ethical investment policy became a fourth factor in the decision-making process. Recognition that there was a duty to invest the Council's Treasury funds carefully and sensibly, while striking an appropriate balance between risk and return. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ayling. I will now open the debate for other Cabinet members. Councillor Sue Mullins.
Just quickly, when I was growing up as a kid, one of the things that was always said in families was never be a borrower or a lender. You know, keep yourself steady and don't have either of those to have to worry about. But running a council is not like that. You've got a lot of money coming in every day and a lot of money going out every day, and the balance has to be kept very carefully. We have to keep reserves in place within the bank or somewhere that as our backup if anything should go wrong, if the accounts, some huge disaster befalls the council, the reserves are there for a good reason. But we also have to have money coming in from different ways. And one of those is that we have put money out, we loan to different councils at different rates. And I have every admiration for our officers for how they operate that, because that is a very difficult thing to do, to make those decisions and make sure you're making the right decisions at the time, sometimes not knowing what's going to happen in the future. Now, we've had criticism in the past from the opposition about how we invest our money and what sort of returns we get. But once again, you cannot predict the future. You cannot always know what's going to go up in the way of interest rates and what's going to go down. And so far as I can see it, our officers have made really prudent, sensible decisions, which meant this council has kept afloat financially for a very, very long time. And we've always had healthy balances and a good record of what we do. Money doesn't go out easily. It goes out to the right places and it comes back at a return. So I would say thank you very much to our officers, because I think they do an amazing job. Predicting the future is never easy, but they use all the checks and balances that are at their disposal to make sure that those decisions they make are in the interests of everybody in Crawley. And I think that pays off. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Sue Mullins. I absolutely agree. Councillor Chris Mullins.
It was just a quickie as well. I wanted to say that I'm pleased to see that the ethical investment policy is still intact and in there. We put that policy together a good number of years ago, and I've been at meetings where our Tory colleagues have said, you shouldn't be investing in the arms industry and etc. We don't invest in killing and death. That's not what this council is all about. And I think that our decisions to keep our ethical policy, whilst in real cash terms might cost us money, in moral and high standard terms, it's a principle that we should never ever move away from. And I'm pleased to see that we're still in these most difficult of circumstances, keeping our ethical policy intact and going forward with it. And please don't start when we get to the full council, Duncan. I know you will. But, it's wrong to be wrong. And, we're right. Our ethical policy is something we should be very, very proud of.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Chris Mullins. Any other cabinet members? No, not seeing anyone. I just wanted to say before we finish that it's important to stress that, and I agree with Councillor Sue Mullins on this, is that we've had great investment returns from our in-house team, which has helped protect our services on many occasions, and so I know the cabinet is grateful, and we would I think like to put in record in the minutes that our continuing gratitude to the team for the work they do. We prioritise, as we all, it's important to stress as well, we prioritise security, liquidity and yield in that order, and ethical investments are applied after all these priorities have been taken into account. But that means that we get the results, and we make what we consider to be the right decision for our society. The only thing I'll say on Councillor Chris Mullins' comments is I almost share his disappointment not to hear from Councillor Crowe which things not on the list he would like us to be investing in this year. But as Councillor Mullins said, there's always an opportunity in the future to get that. But on that basis, everyone's had a chance to speak. I move that the Cabinet approves the recommendations as set out in 2.2 on page 171 of the agenda pack. Can I have a seconder? I saw Councillor Sue Mullins first. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We will now move on to the consideration of the exempt items. Therefore, that's under section 100A, subsection 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act by virtue of the paragraphs specified against the items. Is that agreed? Thank you, Cabinet. The recording and live stream will now finish, so I wish to thank anyone for watching, and may I wish you a pleasant and restful evening.